The storm outside howled like a wounded beast, rattling the shutters of the lonely log cabin when she whispered the words that would change everything. I never slept with anyone. Her voice was small, fragile, as if she feared the truth might shatter between them. Across the firelight, his dark eyes lifted to meet hers eyes that belonged to a man born of fire and battle, an Apache warrior whose presence filled the tiny space like thunder. He did not laugh, nor did he mock her innocence. Instead, he leaned closer, the fire painting his bronzed skin in gold, and whispered in a voice deep and steady, "Then we'll start slow." Marybeth Halley had been raised under the unrelenting skies of the Arizona Territory, where life was as hard as the cracked desert earth. She had grown up knowing men like her father, white ranchers who measured a woman's worth by how much work she could do under the sun. But she had never, not once, imagined herself here alone in a cabin with a man the townsfolk called dangerous, a man whose people they despised. She clutched the edge of her shawl tighter around her shoulders, the warmth of the fire unable to ease the cold trembling in her bones. The storm outside lashed at the world, snow and wind battering the canyon. She should have been afraid of him, this warrior whose reputation carried whispers of raids and vengeance. Yet somehow she wasn't. His name was Koa, his long black hair brushed his broad shoulders, and faint scars ran across his chest, reminders of battles fought under a merciless sun. But in his gaze, Marybeth saw no cruelty. Instead, she saw a depth that frightened her more than any blade. It was a look that saw through her, stripping away the masks she had worn all her life. "Why would you tell me this?" His voice was low, rumbling, the kind of voice that seemed carved from stone and smoke. Marybeth swallowed hard. Her throat felt tight, but she found the courage to answer. "Because I don't want to hide." "Not from you." Koa's lips curved, not in amusement, but in something softer, something she could not yet name. He shifted closer, the firelight catching on the beads and bone trinkets woven into the leather cord around his neck. The air between them grew charged, heavy with a kind of silence that carried unspoken truths. For years, Marybeth had been taught to keep herself untouched, a prize for a marriage she did not want, a cage built by her father's stern hand. She had turned away suitors who looked at her like cattle to be bartered. But Koa had risked his life to save hers only hours before. When her wagon wheel had broken near the canyon rim and the snowstorm descended, it was Koa who appeared. From the cliffs, strong arms pulling her free from death's edge. Now fate had trapped them together. Her heart thudded like a drum. She could still feel his strength in the memory of his arms lifting her, his heartbeat thundering against her cheek. And now, with his words, "Then we'll start slow," the tension between them burned hotter than the flames. Koa reached out, not to claim her, but to brush a strand of damp hair from her face. His touch was careful, reverent, as if she were something precious. The gentleness in his fingers betrayed the fierceness of the warrior she knew him to be. Marybeth's breath caught. She was not afraid. "Not anymore." "Slow," she echoed, her lips trembling with the weight of both fear and longing. His hand lingered against her cheek. Outside, the storm raged, a world of ice and danger. But inside the cabin, it was only them, the girl who had never been touched, and the warrior who vowed to show her a world she had never dared dream. And in that moment, Marybeth understood something dangerous. She didn't want to be saved. She wanted to be seen. The storm had not relented by morning. Snow piled high against the cabin walls, a white prison sealing them inside. The world beyond the shuttered windows was silent, save for the moan of wind. Inside, the fire had burned low, casting the room in deep amber shadows. Marybeth awoke to the smell of smoke and cedar. For a moment, she thought she was still dreaming. The steady sound of fire crackling, The warmth against her skin, it felt unreal, almost too safe. But when she opened her eyes, the sight that met her jolted her wide awake. Koa knelt near the hearth, bare-chested, his strong back lit by the glow. The movement of his muscles as he placed another log onto the flames was hypnotic. The trinkets and beads woven into his necklace caught the light, glimmering like embers themselves. Mary Beth drew in a sharp breath and clutched the blanket around her. "You were shivering," he said without turning, his deep voice carrying easily across the small room. "So I wrapped you in the buffalo hide." Her cheeks warmed. "Thank you." He rose then, turning to face her. In the morning light that slipped through the cracks in the shutters, his eyes were dark and unreadable, but his expression was gentle. He moved with the quiet grace of a man who belonged to the wilderness, every step measured, purposeful. Mary Beth sat up, the blanket pooling in her lap. "How long do you think the storm will last?" she asked. "Long enough," Koa replied. Crouching again to stoke the fire, "The canyon will be buried. No horses can pass until the wind dies." The words should have frightened her, being stranded, cut off from the world, but strangely, they didn't. A part of her, the secret part she'd never dared confess, was glad, because it meant more time here. With him, yet that thought came. With guilt. What would her father say if he knew she was trapped in a cabin with an Apache warrior? The old man's wrath was a storm in itself, and the townsfolk would wag their tongues with venom. She had spent her whole life following the rules, never stepping out of line. But here, with Koa watching her as though she was not a burden but something of worth, she realized how little those rules had ever given her. Koa must have seen the war inside her because he spoke softly, "Your heart is loud." "What troubles you?" Mary Beth startled, eyes darting to him. "Can you hear it?" He touched his chest. "I hear it here." Not with ears. Her lips parted, but no words came. Nobody had ever looked at her the way he did, like he could peel away every wall she had built and see the truth beneath. "I've always done as I was told," she admitted at last, her voice trembling. "Always been what they expected me to be. But when you look at me, it feels like I'm someone else, someone braver." For a moment, silence fell heavy between them, thick with firelight and breath. Then Koa rose to his full height, coming to stand before her. He lowered himself to one knee, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his skin. "You are brave," he said. His hand, large and calloused, reached for hers but did not close around it until she gave him permission with the smallest tilt of her wrist. "Braver than any I have known." Mary Beth's heart thudded painfully against her ribs. Her fingers curled into his palm, and he closed his grip gently. As though holding something fragile. Outside, the storm screamed. Inside, another storm gathered, the kind that burned instead of froze. "I told you last night," he said quietly, his thumb brushing the back of her hand. "We will start slow." Her breath caught. Every word carried weight, not of lust, but of reverence. He was not rushing, not pressing her. He was giving her a choice, something no man had ever offered her before. Mary Beth's throat tightened. She nodded once, slowly, and when Koa leaned closer, his forehead resting against hers, she closed her eyes. The world outside could rage and howl, but here, in this cabin buried by snow, a different kind of fire had taken root, one that no storm could ever extinguish. The third day in the cabin dawned gray and silent, the storm finally easing its grip. The wind had stilled, but the snow lay deep and unbroken across the land, a blanket of white stretching into the endless canyon. Mary Beth stood at the window, peeking through the small gap in the shutter. The world looked still, almost peaceful, but the silence carried its own kind of dread. Out here, silence could mean safety or danger waiting just beyond sight. Behind her, Koa moved quietly, the rhythm of his presence steady and grounding. He was sharpening his knife by the fire, the rasp of stone against metal cutting through the hush. His bare chest gleamed in the glow, tribal necklaces swaying slightly with each movement. The sight of him made her pulse quicken, though she forced herself to look back outside. "Is it always this quiet after a storm?" she asked. Koa did not pause his work. "The land holds its breath. Snow hides many things, tracks, voices." His eyes lifted to hers, dark and piercing, sometimes men. The chill that slipped through her body had nothing to do with the cold. "You mean soldiers, ranchers, men who think this land belongs only to them?" Mary Beth's hand tightened on the edge of the shutter. Her father's ranch had always spoken of Apache as raiders, shadows that slipped from the canyons to take what wasn't theirs. But now, standing here, she saw the truth turned inside out. Koa's people were the ones hunted, forced into corners of the desert, blamed for every hardship. She turned back to him. "If they find us here," his gaze softened, "then they find me?" Her chest ached at the calm certainty in his voice. He had lived his whole life with danger pressing in, yet he carried it like another scar. She, who had been sheltered behind fences and rules, realized how little she understood of real fear until now. The fire popped, scattering sparks. Koa rose to his feet, the movement fluid, quiet. He came to her side, peering through the same small gap in the shutter. For a long moment, they stood so close that she could feel the warmth radiating from his skin, his long hair brushing her shoulder. Mary Beth swallowed, her voice barely a whisper. "Do you regret it?" He glanced down at her. "Regret what?" "Saving me." Koa's expression hardened, not in anger, but in something fierce, uncheckable. "I regret nothing. The land brought me to you. The storm kept you here. That is no accident." His words sank into her like roots. She had been taught that her life would be measured by who she married, by what land or cattle she brought into union. But here, with him, she felt as though she was more than her father's daughter. She was simply Mary Beth, seen for who she was. A sound cut through her thoughts, the distant crunch of snow. Her body stiffened. "Did you hear that?" Koa's hand was already at the knife on his belt. He moved to the door, silent as shadow. For an instant, she wanted to call him back, but the intensity in his movements froze her voice. He cracked. The door opened, cold air rushing in. Outside, the world was endless white. No tracks, no riders. Yet Koa's eyes scanned the distance with the sharpness of a hawk. Finally, he closed the door and barred it again. "Not men," he said. "Deer." Mary Beth released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her knees trembled, and she sank onto the wooden cot, pressing a hand against her chest. Koa crossed the room and crouched before her. "Your fear is not weakness," he said gently. "It keeps you alive." She met his gaze, seeing something in his eyes she hadn't before: patience. Not the patience of a man waiting, but of one who would hold steady no matter how many storms came. Her hand lifted almost without thought, brushing against the beads on his necklace. "And what keeps you alive?" she asked softly. His lips curved. The faintest smile. "You," he whispered. The single word stole her breath. Outside, the world was frozen and harsh, but inside, the cabin burned brighter than any fire. For the first time in her life, Mary Beth didn't care what the world might say, or what dangers waited in the snow. All she cared about was the man before her, the warrior who had saved her life and who, with each passing moment, was claiming her heart. The fourth morning broke with a silence too heavy to be trusted. The storm had passed, leaving the land blanketed in white, a frozen sea of glittering drifts. The sun hung low, pale and cold, and the air was so still Mary Beth swore she could hear her own heartbeat. Koa stood outside the cabin now, his bare chest rising and falling steadily against the winter air. Snow clung to the strands of his long black hair, but he seemed not to notice the cold. His eyes scanned the horizon with the patience of a hunter, every sense alert. Mary Beth lingered at the doorway. The buffalo hide pulled tight around her shoulders. Her stomach twisted as she watched him. He looked like a figure carved from the land itself, unmovable, eternal, but she had learned enough in these last days to know appearances could lie. Even stone could break beneath enough pressure. "Koa," she whispered, "do you see something?" He did not answer immediately. His gaze remained fixed on the canyon ridge. Finally, he said, low and certain, "Riders." Mary Beth's heart plummeted. She squinted into the bright snow, and at last she saw them, tiny black specks moving against the white horizon. Too many to be hunters. Too steady to be wanderers. "Many?" she asked, her voice shaking. "5, maybe more behind," Koa murmured. He stepped back into the cabin, barring the door with one solid motion. "Soldiers or ranchers. Either way, they bring no peace." Mary Beth's mind raced. Her father's men? Soldiers from the fort? Whoever they were, they would never forgive her for being here with him. Her very presence in this cabin, in his company, was enough to mark her as ruined in their eyes. Koa moved swiftly, gathering his bow, the quiver of arrows, the knife he had honed by firelight. He worked with quiet efficiency, like a man who had lived his whole life preparing for this moment. Mary Beth stepped toward him, fear clawing up her throat. "You can't fight them all." His gaze cut to hers, sharp as flint. "I can fight enough to keep you safe." Her breath caught. He said it without hesitation, as though her safety was worth more than his own life. It was a truth she didn't know if she could bear. "Koa," she whispered, reaching for his arm. Her fingers brushed the hard line of muscle, warm even. "In the cold. If they come for us, they won't stop." "Not until, then we do not let them take what is ours," he interrupted, his voice fierce. "Ours." The word thundered through her chest. She had never belonged to anyone, never wanted to, but in that instant the claim was not one of possession but of devotion. He was binding her fate to his, not with chains, but with choice. The sound of hooves grew clearer, crunching snow, breaking. The silence of the canyon. The riders were drawing near. Mary Beth's breath quickened. "What do I do?" Koa placed the bow against the wall and gripped her shoulders, steady and sure. His eyes locked onto hers. "You hide. Behind the hearth. Do not move, do not speak. No matter what you hear." Her lips trembled. "I can't just let you." "You can," he said firmly, softer this time. He lifted one hand, brushing his thumb along her cheek. The gentleness in his touch was almost unbearable against the sharp fear burning inside her. "Because I need to know you live, that is enough." Mary Beth felt her chest tighten, a hot sting building behind her eyes. She wanted to argue, to fight, but there was no time. Outside, the riders were closer now, their voices carrying on the frozen air. Koa pressed his forehead against hers, just as he had that first night. His breath mingled with hers, steadying her. "Remember," he whispered, slow, like the fire, like the river. "That is how we begin." Then he pulled away, lifting his bow once more, his muscles taut with readiness. Mary Beth stumbled back, her shawl slipping from her shoulders as she crouched behind the hearthstones. She pressed her hand against her mouth to silence the sob rising in her throat. Through the crack between stones, she saw him, a lone figure, shirtless against the cold, standing tall before the barred door, his long hair like black fire against the pale morning dot, and then the sound came, the pounding of fists. On wood, the bark of men's voices demanding entry. The storm outside had passed, but the storm inside was only just beginning. The pounding at the cabin door shook the walls, snow cascading from the roof in heavy thuds. Men's voices shouted through the wood, rough and commanding, their tone leaving no doubt they weren't here to ask. They were here to take. "Koa." A voice barked, sharp as a whip. "We know you're in there. Come out or we'll set fire to the place." Mary Beth pressed her back against the cold stone of the hearth, her heart slamming against her ribs so hard she thought the men outside might hear it. Smoke from the fire stung her eyes, but she dared not move. Koa stood unflinching at the center of the room, bow drawn, his shadow thrown tall against the walls by the flames. The pounding grew harder. A crack splintered through the wood. Mary Beth flinched. "They'll kill you," she whispered, her voice trembling. Koa didn't turn. His gaze was fixed on the door, his body still as stone. "Let them try." But Mary Beth saw what he would not admit, the way his muscles tensed, the faint rise and fall of his chest betraying that even warriors knew fear. He was one man against many. No matter how skilled, no matter how brave, he could not hold them. All. The men outside shouted again. "Girl, if you're in there, we'll take you back where you belong. Don't shame your people by staying with him." Mary Beth's blood ran cold. Her father's men. Of course, they had found her. A lifetime of obedience screamed at her to answer, to step forward, to let them drag her back to the life she'd always known. But another voice, deeper, steadier, pulsed inside her, the voice that had awakened in this cabin. In the firelit nights when Koa's quiet strength showed, her she was worth more than cattle or land. Her throat tightened. No doubt when the door cracked. Again, splinters flying inward, Mary Beth's body moved before her mind could catch up. She scrambled out from behind the hearth, her shawl falling away, her hair tumbling loose around her shoulders. Mary Beth. Koa hissed, his bow lowering a fraction. She shook her head, her voice fierce though her body trembled. No more hiding. Not from them, not from anyone. The door groaned as another heavy blow struck it. Through the gap, Mary Beth glimpsed the shadow of her father's foreman, his hat brim low, his voice dripping venom. "Come out, girl. You don't belong with that savage." The word cut like a blade, but Mary Beth didn't flinch. She planted herself at Koa's side, her small frame dwarfed by his towering presence. For a moment, silence fell in the cabin, two figures united against the storm outside. Koa's eyes flicked to her, dark and unreadable, but beneath the sharp edges she saw something raw. Fear for her. "They'll kill you," he whispered. "Then let them," she said, her voice breaking, tears blurring her vision. "I won't go back, not without you." The bow in his hands trembled, not from weakness, but from the force of something deeper than rage. Slowly, he lowered it, his jaw tight, his chest rising with a sharp breath. The men outside shouted again, louder this time, threats and curses carried on the frozen wind. The door shuddered on its hinges, and then Koa did something Mary Beth did not expect. He reached for her hand. His rough, calloused palm closed over hers, warm, grounding, uncheckable. "They will come through that door," he said, his voice like a vow. "But if they want you, they must step over me first." Mary Beth's heart twisted. Her fingers tightened in his. "And they'll have to step over me too?" For a heartbeat, the world stilled. The fire popped. Snow drifted from the roof. Outside, boots crunched closer, voices rose. But inside the cabin, the choice had already been made. They would not run. They would not bow. They would face whatever storm came next together. The cabin door burst inward with a deafening crack. Splinters flew across the floor as freezing air rushed in, carrying the smell of horses, gunpowder, and men who had come to claim blood. Mary Beth gasped, her hand tightening in Koa's. 5 men stormed the threshold, rifles in hand, their boots crunching over broken wood. Snow swirled behind them, white against their dark coats. At the front stood her father's foreman, Dalton Pike, a broad man with a scarred jaw and eyes hard as granite. "There she is." Dalton spat, his voice booming in the small space. "Dragged into a heathen's den like a dog. Your father, Sent us to fetch you back." Mary Beth's stomach turned, but Koa stepped forward before she could speak, his bow raised, the string drawn taut. Firelight flickered against his bronzed skin, glinting off the beads and bone ornaments hanging across his chest. His long black hair whipped around his shoulders as the wind howled through the shattered doorway. "You will not take her." Koa sighed, his voice steady, deep as stone. Dalton's lip curled. "Stand down, savage. This don't concern you." "It concerns me," Koa growled. "She is under my protection." The foreman laughed, a cruel bark. "Protection? She belongs with her own kind." He turned his rifle toward Mary Beth, his eyes sharp as a hawk's. "Girl, you walk out with us now, or we'll leave his body in the snow." Mary Beth's breath caught. The men shifted behind Dalton, hands tightening on their weapons. Koa did not waver. His arrow remained trained on Dalton's chest. The silence stretched, taut as the bowstring between them. Then, without warning, Dalton raised his rifle. The world erupted. Koa loosed his arrow, the whistle sharp and fast. It struck Dalton's shoulder, spinning him back with a roar of pain. Gunfire thundered in the cabin, sparks bursting as bullets struck the stone hearth. Mary Beth screamed and dropped to the floor, her hands covering her head. Koa moved like lightning, ducking low, grabbing another arrow, loosing it in one fluid motion. A second man crumpled, his rifle clattering to the ground. The cabin filled with smoke, firelight strobing across chaos. Mary Beth crawled toward the hearth, the roar of her heartbeat deafening her. She clutched at the stones, her body trembling, but through the haze she saw him, Koa, shirtless against the storm, his muscles flexing with every draw of the bow, his eyes blazing with the fire of a man who would not yield. "Mary Beth, stay." "Down!" he shouted, his voice rough with urgency. She pressed herself tighter against the wall, but her gaze never left him. Fear clawed at her, but something else burned hotter, fierce, desperate love. Dalton, wounded but not fallen, staggered to his feet, blood soaking his coat. His rifle aimed again, straight at Koa's chest. "No!" Mary Beth cried, the word torn from her throat. Without thinking, she grabbed the iron poker from the hearth and hurled it with all her strength. It struck Dalton's arm, knocking his aim off just as he fired. The bullet ripped past Koa's side, grazing his ribs, but not piercing. He loosed another arrow, the shaft slamming into Dalton's leg, sending him crashing to the floor. The remaining men faltered, fear flickering in their eyes. One bolted into the snow, another dragged Dalton back toward the shattered doorway, shouting curses. Within moments, the cabin was filled only with the retreating sound of hoofbeats and the sharp hiss of Mary Beth's own breath. Koa lowered his bow, his chest heaving, blood dripping from the shallow wound at his side. He turned, eyes searching, and found her crouched by the hearth, trembling, tears streaking her cheeks. She rushed to him, her hands pressing against his wound, desperate, shaking. "You're hurt. Oh God, Koa, you're hurt." His hand covered hers, warm, strong despite the blood. His gaze softened, the fire in his eyes replaced with something deeper. "You saved me." Her lips trembled. "I couldn't let them." Before she could finish, he pulled her against him, his arms wrapping tight around her trembling body. Her face pressed to his chest. She felt the thud of his heartbeat, strong and steady despite the chaos. "They will come back," he murmured into her hair. "But so long as I breathe, they will never take you." Mary Beth clung to him, her tears soaking his skin. Outside, the snow glistened in cruel silence, but inside the cabin, amidst blood and fire, a vow had been forged stronger than steel. The storm outside raged on, wind howling like wolves across the empty plains. But inside the cabin, silence fell heavy, broken only by Mary Beth's ragged breathing and the low crackle of the fire. The snow drifting through the shattered doorway hissed as it melted on the hearthstones. Koa leaned against the wall, blood trickling from his side where the bullet had grazed him. His body was taut with exhaustion, but his bow remained gripped in his hand, ready if the men returned. Marybeth pressed her palms against his wound, her fingers trembling, streaked crimson. "You can't keep fighting like this," she whispered, her voice cracking. "They'll come back, Koa. And they won't stop until what?" His voice was calm, steady as stone. His dark eyes locked onto hers. "Until they drag you away? Until they break you, make you belong to a world where your spirit will wither?" He shook his head, strands of black hair falling loose around his face. "No, not while I still draw breath." Her throat tightened, her heart aching with both fear and something fiercer, sharper love that had grown wild, untamed, like the fire that burned between them. "You'd die for me," she whispered. More statement than question. "I would." His hand rose, rough but gentle, brushing the tears from her cheek. "But I'd rather live for you." The words struck her deeper than any bullet, shattering the walls of doubt she had clung to. She sank against him, her forehead pressed to his chest, listening to the steady drum of his heart. For the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid of what lay ahead. Koa wrapped his arms around her, holding her tight despite his wound, his warmth and strength surrounding her like a shield. Outside, the snow beat against the land, but here, in his arms, she felt safe. After a long moment, he drew back, his eyes searching hers. "Marybeth," he said softly, his voice low and rough, "you must decide. If you stay, your father will send more men. He will never forgive. You will live hunted, cast aside from the world you once knew." She lifted her chin, her pale blue eyes gleaming with defiance. "Then let him hunt me. Let him curse me. I won't go back, Koa. Not to him. Not to that life. My place is here with you." His breath caught, his jaw tightening as if he needed to be sure he'd heard right. "You would leave everything behind? Your family, your name, your land? I'd leave it all." Her voice trembled, but her resolve did not. "None of it matters if I can't have this. If I can't have you." A slow, fierce smile spread across his face, though his eyes burned with emotion. He touched her cheek, his thumb tracing the curve of her lips. "Then we start new, together." The fire popped, sparks leaping into the air as if to seal the Quilombus. "Vow," Marybeth kissed him then, soft at first, then with all the desperation and love that had been caged in her for so long. His arms tightened around her, pulling her close, his lips answering with equal hunger and tenderness. In that kiss was a promise, unspoken but eternal. Whatever storms came, whatever battles raged, they would face them as one. When they finally broke apart, she rested her head against his shoulder, her breath mingling with his. "What now?" she asked, her voice small in the vast silence. He glanced at the doorway, where snow swirled in ghostly sheets, and then back at her. "Now we leave this place. The mountains will hide us. The rivers will guide us. My people will welcome you. If your heart is true." Her hand tightened in his, steady as her voice when she answered, "It is." They gathered what little they could, blankets, food, his bow and arrows, the few possessions she had carried from her old life. Before stepping out, Marybeth turned once more to the cabin, its warmth flickering in the firelight. It had been her prison and her salvation, the place where fear had turned to love, where a vow stronger than blood had been born. Koa took her hand, his tall, muscular frame silhouetted against the storm. His hair whipped around his face, tribal jewelry glinting in the firelight. A warrior who had fought not just for survival but for love. "Ready?" he asked. Marybeth nodded, her heart thundering with both fear and exhilaration. "With you always." Together. They stepped into the snow, their footprints side by side, disappearing into the vast wilderness. Behind them lay a world of judgment and violence. Ahead, only uncertainty. But between them was something greater than fear, greater than hate, love wild, untamed and eternal as the plains themselves.